Good morning. Nice to see you all here this morning on this lovely autumn day. This morning, I'm going to give a talk titled Perfect. This is perfect. When I say something like that, I feel like maybe I'd see some heads craning around, looking. What is? Looking for that unicorn that is the perfect thing. Because if there's one thing that we know, if there's anything we can say about everything, it's that nothing's perfect, which is perfect. And maybe when we hear a teaching like this is perfect, we think it's more of that Buddhist optimism. There are no problems. This is perfect. And I kind of laugh. I mean, I've actually heard somebody describe it that way to me. And there are others who feel that Buddhism is kind of pessimistic because that first noble truth is suffering. Suffering. And what a pessimistic thing to believe, or whatever it is they think. But I do like Walpola Rahula, the great teacher, his description of Buddhism. He said, not optimistic, not pessimistic, realistic, right? It's about coming back to reality. Then we encounter this teaching, this is perfect. So what are we talking about? We might hear it as, oh, this is perfect. So it's saying there are no problems. And clearly, if I just have to look at my life, there are problems. So I don't know what they're talking about. Because when we hear something like, and you might have even encountered a teaching that says there are no problems. As I was preparing this talk, back in my head, I think I gave a talk a number of years ago that I called No Problem. And we hear something like that, we might ask ourselves, like, when we hear there are no problems or this is perfect, and we think, well, of course there are problems. What I think we don't ask ourselves is, what do we mean by a problem? What is it that's a problem? And I have to admit, we don't usually go through life defining everything. So we don't look at a cushion and go, a cushion is a object that, you don't sit there and define everything. So of course, problem isn't something you maybe run around defining for yourself. And we may be a little bit like, I have to look at his name, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, when he was talking about obscenity. This was back in 1964, and he said about obscenity, when asked to define it, he said, well, I know it when I see it. So maybe that's what a problem is for us. We can't really say exactly what it is, but we know it when we see it. But there's one thing, there's one quality to problems that I think we could probably agree on. Maybe not, but I have a feeling this is a sense that problems pose for us, and that is that they're an obstacle. So problems are an obstacle. There's something that gets in our way. In fact, I thought I would just look up the word problem to see what the etymology of it was. This is, by the way, after I thought, well, I think most people think of problems as being obstacles. So I looked up the etymology for problem, sort of the history of the word. And the Greek root is the word problema. So, if you've heard no problemo, it's kind of getting right to the heart here. But that Greek word literally means obstacle. So when you think of a problem, that's what a problem is. It's an obstacle. And what's an obstacle? That's a lot easier than what's a problem. An obstacle is something that's in our way. Get it out of my way. There's a way. There's the way that things are supposed to be going. And then there are these obstacles, and they kind of get in the way. But my question is, are there things that get in our way? Do they block us from our way? And I think about an example from my life. It may not have been yours, but I was on a bike path. And it's a bike path that goes along the Minnesota River. And it's really beautiful as these bluffs that kind of go along it. But because of that, they have problems with rock slides. And this particular year, the path ended up being blocked off after a while because of the rock slides, so they could clear it away. And I'm talking like, we're not talking rocks, we're talking like boulders, big, giant rocks that were over the path. So my husband and I are biking on the path. Whoop. Uh-oh, these are really big rocks. So obstacle? Well, at this point, we asked ourselves, so should we go on or should we just turn around? And we could see how many boulders there were, and we could kind of get a look at what they were. We picked up our bikes and carefully climbed up onto the boulders and walked over the boulders and then kept biking. At that point, the boulders were our path. That was our path. Picking up our bikes and going over the boulders. Now, does that mean there weren't rocks on a bicycle path? Well, no, of course it doesn't. But the path was picking up our bikes and going over the boulders. It was not an obstacle. And even if we decided to turn around, the path would be the path we were riding on, right? So the boulders wouldn't really be the way we think of it, as an obstacle, something that's in our way. But again, I just want to make sure we understand that doesn't mean there weren't rocks on a bicycle path that we had to deal with. We had to do that. We had to make a decision about what we were doing, and we had to be very careful as we were carrying our bicycles over the rocks. This is probably the second time. We don't usually bike on trails that are too unstable. We're usually on bike paths where, it's clearly a bike path, and etc. But I do remember one other time we had to carry our bikes 4 miles, actually. And that was because we were in South Dakota. And we were in Custer State Park. And they have a huge bison herd there, huge bison herd. And we were all, it was some friends of mine and I, we were mountain biking, just sort of terrain biking. And first thing that happened was the trail narrowed to like a gate, just one gate. And sitting right next to the gate was a bison. So we were like, could bison? And he was down, laying down or whatever. So we just carefully rode our bikes past him and through the gateway. And then we were biking along. And we hit this area where you could just see the plain. It was just plains. And a huge herd of bison crossing the bike path. And we stopped and we looked and we were all amazed at what we were seeing. And then we said, well, we probably don't want to go biking through that. That's actually a herd of bison. So we thought we'll just go back the way we came and we'll figure out some other way to go. So, and this was before smartphones. But I had a friend who was really into technology, and he had this thing. It was this big device. It was a GPS device. So he had a GPS device, and we just thought we'd figure out a path. So we turn around, and the trail's covered with bison. And we realized we're surrounded by bison. We're like, oh, now what do we do? And there were so many that we knew that if we we're going to wait for them, that the day would go by. So we had to figure out something else to do. So my friend took his GPS device and he figured out where the road was, where our car had been parked. And he said, it's that way. And he pointed at these woods. So we just had to take our bikes. We couldn't bike through the woods, and carry our bikes several miles through the woods to get back to the road. And that was our path. That was our path. And were the bison obstacles? Well, I suppose we couldn't do the thing that we intended to do. But I have a story now about when I went to Custer Park. So it's not that there aren't, when we have a teaching like there aren't problems, it doesn't mean that there aren't any problems. We think about that story of the 84th problem that I think most of us have encountered. Steve tells it in Buddhism, Plain and Simple. Where a gentleman is just not doing well. He's beset by problems, and he doesn't know what to do about them. So he hears about this great teacher, hears about the Buddha, And he tells himself, well, I'm going to go. I'll go see that guy. He'll help me out. So he goes to the Buddha. He lays out all of his problems for the Buddha. And I imagine that scene in Seinfeld when George Costanza goes to a therapist and he's laying out all of his problems, and it just goes on and on and on and on. He actually makes the therapist depressed or something like that, except Buddha didn't get depressed. Buddha just listened to all the man's complaints, and when the man is finally done, Buddha said, well, I can't help you with any of those problems. And the guy was like, what? What do you mean you can't help me with any of these problems? You're a great teacher. That's why I came to you. I came to you so you can help me with this. And the Buddha said, look, here's the deal. All of us have 83 problems. All of us do. And if we think we get rid of one, another's going to show up. We all have 83 problems. I can help you with your 84th problem. And that guy said, well, 84th problem. What's that? And Buddha said, you don't want to have any problems. So we don't teach that there aren't any problems, but the problems, the way we usually think of it, there really aren't problems. Not in the way that we think of it, not in the way of an obstacle or an impediment that we just can't get out of our way. These 83 problems, if you think about the way the Buddha teaches it in this story, the 83 problems are part of being here. They're part of being here. That's it. They're not something that's separate from us. They're not something that's in our way, something that happens to us, might be another way we think of it. They're not something that's just out there for us to get rid of it, right? So if we think we can get rid of stuff, that is actually akin to that 84th problem. In other words, we've got this problem and now we're thinking, I can get rid of that. If you find yourself in a position where you want to get rid of some problem, that is a signal for you. Just pay attention. I mean, everything. We should be paying attention every moment, but we go through it. Right? If you want to get rid of something, just pay attention because something's going on right there. And that is, we don't want this. Whatever this is, we don't want this. And I want to be rid of it. And again, there are situations where you can understand that. Something arises and it's you just don't want it. But look at how you're putting the world together. There's something there, you can get rid of it. Can you ever really get rid of anything? What are we doing? You get that anything that I'm talking about. Yeah, I get rid of all kinds of stuff. It's a way that we're looking at the world that reminds me of one of our precepts. That's actually our first precept. The precept is a follower of the way does not kill. Bodhidharma's teaching that goes along with it is self-nature is clear and obvious. Within the ever-abiding Dharma, not nursing a view of extinction is called the precept of not killing. And extinction, that can mean a whole lot of things. Wanting to be rid of something, wanting to have something to be done with. That's holding a view of extinction. And we can see that that's how we're interacting with the world, that we want to be rid of this. You think about whatever the thing is that you're talking about that's a problem. Whatever is showing up right now, that problem is a condition for right now, if that problem is no longer facing us. So anything that we're thinking about that's a problem is a condition for right now. If we reframe this idea of problem, we can even see that it may be necessary for where we are right now for that problem to have arisen. Because it's a condition for what's showing up right now. I could say, for example, and many of you know that I came to this practice because I had been suffering from anxiety. And somebody just said, you ought to try meditation. And that eventually led to this. So I could say my anxiety led to this practice. Right? It's inadequate description of what actually took place. And yet, anxiety is a condition for me being here. It's a condition for me being here. And certainly when I was going through some of my anxious spells, wanting to be rid of that was definitely something that I desired greatly. I didn't want to have those feelings. I wanted them to be over. They're pretty intense. We could think about this, our Zoom community. If it weren't for COVID, we wouldn't have the Zoom community. And again, it's not that Zoom, because of Zoom, we have because of COVID, we have a Zoom community. I mean, that's an inadequate way of describing what happened, but because of COVID, COVID's one of the conditions by which we have a Zoom community. And that, saying that, does not diminish at all the pain or suffering that we may have gone through in these times that are distressing to us, these difficulties. So it's not to diminish that at all. You know, when I was suffering from my anxiety, it was suffering that happened during COVID, when, of course, COVID is still around. But when we were facing that lockdown, when there was such great uncertainty, you know, there was suffering. But we can be with suffering more easily when we see its root, which is when we see suffering as an obstacle, as something that's layered on our life, or that there's something that we equate with our suffering that is outside of this, that's an obstacle that's in our way. Because when we do that, when we see suffering is outside of us as an obstacle, or that there's something that's causing our suffering, oh, my anxiety is causing my suffering, then we've got an obstacle. And then it becomes impossible for us to live with the obstacles that are impossible for us to live with. And there are some. We'll face them. They'll just seem impossible. I encountered a story in a book, The Hidden Lamp, which is a collection of stories of basically Zen stories, both ancient and recent, of Zen women teaching. And this particular story features Seisho Miley Scott. She was a teacher in California. She got her Dharma transmission in 1998 from Mel Weitzman, and went on to start a temple up in Northern California, Rin Shinji, which is Forest Heart Temple, way up. If you know Northern California, almost in Eureka, so way up in that territory. She started a temple in 2000. She passed away in 2001. But I encountered this story that really gets to this, when these obstacles seem like something we can't put up with. Crying in despair, an earnest student asked her teacher, Seisho Miley Scott, "I've worked so hard to transform this crippling loneliness. I can neither shake it nor live with it. Can you help me?" Holding the student in a steady gaze and offering her a confident smile, Miley ended the conversation with, "Please don't ever think anything is out of place." And that's it. So think about that situation. I mean, crying in despair. This person's in a very desperate place, suffering from loneliness. And loneliness is difficult. You've suffered from loneliness, you feel very isolated. And you reach out, you might reach out to people. And there's only so much people can do. There really is. You have to, you discover, address your life. You have to do it yourself, which doesn't mean there aren't others that are also walking our path. There aren't others, by our path, I just mean aren't alive, who maybe you can talk to or reach out to. I'm not saying that, but ultimately you have to make it through that. You have to do it. So there's only so much that people can do to help you, which I can only imagine when you're suffering from loneliness exacerbates the sense of loneliness. You know, that's just, it feels like it's just all you, all alone. And this person was dealing with this loneliness. The way they described it was crippling loneliness. So this person feels like, I can't even take another step forward because of this loneliness. And in fact, there's that statement that she says, "I can neither shake it nor live with it." Wow. I can't get rid of it. I can't be with it. And that is devastating. That's absolutely devastating. 'Cause, And as long as whatever that is, in this case, this loneliness, as long as it's an it that is out there, that's in our way, something we need to overcome, we find we can either shake it or live with it. What do we do? What are we to do? So Seisho's response was interesting. I don't know what we would have expected, but for her to say, please don't ever think anything is out of place. She's helping the student to really see what is at the heart of that despair that she's feeling. You even say loneliness itself, that there's this loneliness, this thing that's out there, and she's separate. It's a whole way of constructing the world, that she's separate from the rest of the world. Again, that's right at the heart of loneliness itself. Don't think anything is out of place. Don't think there's any obstacle, there's anything that shouldn't be here. Here it is. This is the way it is. That doesn't mean, again, that she's not feeling loneliness, that she's not suffering from loneliness, that she doesn't need to tend to that, pay attention to it, work with it, with the sense that I can't get rid of it, I can't live with it. What is the other option? Well, now we can do this third way and see that that loneliness is not some kind of obstacle you can get rid of. It is your path. It's not something that's in your path. It's not something that's in your way. So it's to see our life, things happen. We don't want them to happen. We might think of them as accidents. Oh, that was terrible. We were reading a section from a book this morning by Zenkai Blanche Hartman, a book, Seeds for a Boundless Life. And she refers to what we would probably call accidents as surprises, which I thought was just delightful. Because really, it's just how we're putting this together. Surprise is just always, every moment can be a surprise if we just open ourselves up to it. But an accident, that's like something we don't want to have happen. And we think of life as things that are happening to us, accidents, things that get in our way, things that are troubling or disturbing the way that it's supposed to be. Man, you can't get rid of that. It's just what's showing up. So can you realize that thing that you're calling an obstacle, that you're thinking is trouble, that it's just this. It is just this. In fact, it is perfectly this and that. We hear that and we go, what are you talking about? We're just talking about not seeing this, whatever it is that this is showing up as something you got to get rid of that shouldn't be happening. That's what we do. We think when these things arise, they shouldn't be happening. I can't, what do I do? And again, it can be pretty tough. It can be, I can't get rid of it. I can't stick with it any longer. So when we realize that whatever it is that's showing up is perfectly this, then we have an opportunity to see what that means. I can't live with this any longer. If you've gone through that feeling and then you've made it through the other side, how did you do that? How did that happen? I don't even remember what it was. I woke up one night many years ago, just the middle of the night. That was a long time ago, 25, 30 years ago. And I don't know why, but I just was filled with despair, just filled with it. I couldn't get back to sleep. It was so overwhelming. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. It was impossible. It was impossible. It was impossible. I can't even state that enough. And you know what happened is I finally did fall asleep for an hour, however long I had before my alarm went off and I had to go to work. And when I woke up, it was all like a faint memory. I just remembered it had happened. But when I was going through it, it seemed so impossible because I really desperately wanted it to be gone. And I was thinking, oh my God, 4 more hours, 5 more hours of this? Wow. And it is impossible. And so there's situations that arise. So what happens? What could I do? What could I do? So there I was. And I was getting through it. You start to ask, what was going on there? What is that? And again, it's that seeing it as something that's in our way that makes the suffering so difficult. If we can see what it is, it's just this. It's the boulders on the bicycle path. And now we pick up our bike and we walk over. That's the path now. And we can see this and see that this can be no other way than it is right now. It can't be any other way. Here it is. You can tell yourself, why is this going on? You know, I think I had that question where I said, how did I get myself in this place? I was sort of saying it jokingly, but when I thought about it, I went, there we go again. And there's the others like, how did I get myself into this position where I had so much stuff to do all at the same time? And I, well, that's not helping matters. In fact, all that did is I do have a friend in my life named Anxiety, and he kind of showed up and he made my face numb a little bit. And I went, yeah, time to just get back to work. Just tend to what needs to be taken care of. Because this way is the way it is. And in realizing that is freedom. There's freedom there. Usually we spend so much time working, such a burden trying to get it to be any other way than what it is. But if we can live this and take care of whatever it is, but just live this, there's freedom there. And that freedom is to realize this is perfect. This. I don't know if people have questions or comments, but I welcome them at this time. David.
Texas has an unusual sense of what justice is, as it just proved with Ken Paxton. But in regard to the precept not to kill, they have a saying that he needed killing is a legal defense.
I'm sorry, what was that?
He needed killing. That's a legal defense in Texas.
He needed to kill him?
He needed to be killed.
Oh, to be killed.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, anything you want to add to that? Yeah. He needed to be killed. Wow.
Oh, it might. It brings to mind the possible idea that that's how you take care of this person in this situation. You kill him.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, in a way, it's just a very isolating way of looking at. I don't know why that person needed to be killed in the logic of this particular system you're describing, but it is we can even see this in our own legal system where we just focus on this one thing, almost in isolation to the context in which it has arisen, whatever the crime might be, and then we punish. So we isolate the thing and then we punish. And sometimes the punishment feels like it's taking vengeance on the other person. It really has that feeling to it. But it isolates it. It takes it out of the conditions from which it's arisen. And it also isolates it in that, think about the impact in this country of how many people are imprisoned. We're one of the high imprisonment countries in the world. And you think there are families who might be impacted by these people being in prison. So there's a whole nother side to it. There's a whole vastness to all of this. That something like that, to me, seems like it's not quite taking into consideration, but it's hard to say. I don't really know exactly. Yeah, exactly what you're talking about. But so I don't want to make any judgments on it. But just thinking about our own situation, how easy it is again just to focus on something. Well, that's wrong, and that this is the consequence of that. And those are real. So I'm not saying, go ahead and break laws now because they're not taking into account totality or whatever, pay attention to that. But as we're living in this world, pay attention to that, separating something out. That's what trying to extinguish something is, in a way. It's thinking there's this thing and you just get rid of it. Not understanding that getting rid of whatever you think you're getting rid of is really just transforming it. And now it's going to show up as this other thing. Somebody was telling me about a friend of hers whose husband had passed away recently. And she stressed at the beginning of the story, oh, he was a redhead, And so she was visiting her friend, and woodpeckers were coming to the bird feeder. And she was saying it was astonishing. First was a downy woodpecker. If you know your woodpeckers, they're the little cute little woodpeckers, and they do a little patch of red on their head, And then the next one that came was a pileated. And if you know what a pileated is, that's a spectacle. That's a big red-headed woodpecker, and it landed on the suet feeder. And then the next one, and she didn't know what it was, but I happen to know it was a red-bellied woodpecker that she was describing to me. And those are also really beautiful birds. They have a vivid kind of orange-red back of their head. So these three birds visited one at a time. And then my friend stressed, and they're all redheaded. And I just went, well, what are you trying to tell me? That somehow the husband's signaling to his wife through these redheaded woodpeckers? I could easily also read it as this. The wife has a hole in her heart, the shape of her husband. And what she's going to see is going to be affected by that, So you're going to see those woodpeckers and see your husband in the woodpeckers. So just talking about the transformation, that the husband's still showing up. He's showing up now as these woodpeckers, but not in a way that I think I was being told in the story. I mean, at least I don't believe the husband was somehow signaling to everybody. He was signaling, but in a very different way. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you.